Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your city and state in the comments because I always enjoy seeing how far. These stories travel across America and beyond. Kenneth wasn't expecting visitors that night. The Atlanta mansion was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that had become normal. He had spent the day making decisions worth millions of dollars. People had shaken his hand. Executives had praised him. Investors had congratulated him. Now he stood alone in a house big enough to hold dozens of people. The doorbell rang. Kenneth frowned. Very few people came to his home without calling first. He walked to the front door and opened it. The moment he looked outside, he froze. A woman stood on the porch holding a small gift bag. She was smiling. Not the nervous smile of someone asking for help, not the forced smile of someone trying to impress him. A genuine smile. For several seconds, Kenneth simply stared. He knew that face, but it didn't make sense. Then recognition hit him. "Nancy?" The woman laughed softly. "You still remember me?" Kenneth blinked twice. "Of course I remember you. 5 years. 5 entire years had passed, yet somehow he recognized her immediately. Nancy looked different now, more confident, more settled, more certain of herself. But it was definitely her, the young black woman he had met years ago, the woman he had helped one afternoon and never expected to see again. Kenneth looked at the gift bag, then back at Nancy. His mind immediately searched for answers. Why was she here? What had happened? Did she need money? A job? A favor? Most people who appeared at a billionaire's door usually wanted something. Nancy seemed to notice the questions on his face. Her smile widened. "I know what you're thinking." Kenneth folded his arms. "Do you?" "You think I came because I need something." Kenneth didn't answer. That answer alone was enough. Nancy lifted the gift bag slightly. "I actually came to repay a debt." Kenneth stared at her. "A debt?" "Yes." His confusion deepened. As far as he knew, Nancy didn't owe him anything. Not a single dollar, not a favor, nothing. The statement made no sense, and yet she sounded completely serious. Kenneth looked at the gift bag again. "Nancy, I think you've got the wrong person." She shook her head. "No, I came to exactly the right person." For the first time, Kenneth felt genuinely curious. Not about business, not about money, not about a deal, about her, about why she was standing on his doorstep after 5 years, about what debt she believed she owed. "Let me ask you something. Has someone ever said a few words to you that stayed in your heart for years? Has one moment of kindness ever arrived exactly when you needed it most? And if that person changed your life without realizing it, would you ever go back and tell them?" Because Nancy wasn't standing at Kenneth's door to ask for help. She was standing there because of something that happened 5 years earlier, and Kenneth was about to discover that a single act of kindness can travel much farther than money ever will. Kenneth stepped aside and motioned toward the entrance. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in." Nancy smiled and walked inside. As she entered the mansion, she looked around briefly. The house was beautiful. Every detail spoke of success, the kind of place many people dreamed about. Yet something felt missing. Nancy couldn't explain it immediately, but she felt it. Kenneth led her into a sitting area. "Can I get you something to drink?" he asked. "Water is fine." A few moments later, they sat facing each other. The gift bag remained on Nancy's lap. Kenneth couldn't stop looking at it. Finally, he laughed. "You're making me nervous with that thing." Nancy laughed too. "Good. Now you know how I felt 5 years ago." Kenneth smiled, but his curiosity only grew. 5 years. He remembered helping her. He remembered the conversation. He remembered telling her to keep going. But he still couldn't understand why she was here. What he didn't know was that Nancy had learned something recently, something that stayed on her mind for weeks. The billionaire who encouraged people, the man who invested in communities, the man who inspired employees, the man everyone admired, was lonely, not because he lacked friends, not because he lacked success, but because genuine connection had become rare in his life. People respected Kenneth. People admired Kenneth. People needed Kenneth. Very few people simply cared about Kenneth. Nancy recognized that feeling. Years ago, people had walked past her without seeing her. Now she realized many people walked toward Kenneth every day, without truly seeing him. Different circumstances, same loneliness. That realization changed everything. She wasn't sitting in this mansion because she wanted something. She was sitting there because she believed somebody needed to hear the truth, a truth money couldn't buy, a truth Kenneth had no idea was about to change his evening. And maybe much more than that. Before we continue, let's take a quick moment to pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together today. Thank you for every person listening right now. Remind us that kindness is never wasted, even when we don't immediately see the results. Help us encourage others, lift people up, and recognize the value in every person we meet. May this story inspire hope, gratitude, and love. Amen. Welcome to Love, Money, and Secret, where America's greatest stories and life lessons meet creativity and heart. If you're new to the family, we're grateful to have you here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way. And if you're enjoying this story already, please take a second to like this video and leave a comment below. Those small actions help. YouTube shared these stories with more people, and we truly appreciate your support. Now let me ask you something. If someone changed your life with one act of kindness, would you ever go back and thank them? Would you drive across the city years later just to make sure they knew their kindness mattered? Because that's exactly what Nancy was about to do. But before Kenneth could understand why she had come back, we need to go back 5 years, back to the day their lives crossed for the very first time, back to the afternoon that changed both of their futures without either of them realizing it. 5 years earlier, Atlanta was moving like everybody had somewhere urgent to be. But Nancy's life was not moving that easily. At 25, she was working hard just to stay one step ahead of trouble. Some mornings, she was up before sunrise getting ready for one job. Some evenings, she was rushing from work to community college, carrying books in one hand and a tired hope in the other. She did not have much money, but she had discipline. She had faith. She had a laugh that could make tired people smile even when nothing around them felt funny. At church events, Nancy was the one people called when tables needed setting, food needed serving, or someone elderly needed help carrying groceries home. One older woman once told her, "Baby, you help everybody. Who helps you?" Nancy smiled and said, "The Lord, caffeine, and whatever discount the grocery store is offering." That was Nancy. She could be tired and still make someone laugh. She could be struggling and still show up for others. That Saturday afternoon, she was helping prepare donated supplies for a neighborhood outreach program. Boxes of canned food, bottled water, children's items, and basic home goods had to be moved across town. Nancy had volunteered because she knew what it felt like to need help and not want pity. But downtown Atlanta had no patience for her problems. Her transportation arrangement failed. Her phone battery was low. Her cash was almost gone. And she was standing near the sidewalk with 2 heavy boxes, trying to figure out how to get everything where it needed to go. Cars passed, people passed, some glanced at her, most kept walking. Nancy shifted one box against her hip and tried to smile through the heat. "If this is character building," she muttered, "I think I've got enough character already." No one responded. A man in a suit walked around her like she was a traffic cone. A woman looked at the boxes, looked at Nancy's tired face, and hurried away. Nancy swallowed her frustration. She refused to cry in public. Not today. Not while holding donated food meant for people who were counting on her. So she adjusted her grip, lifted her chin, and whispered, "All right, Nancy. One step at a time." She took one step. The box nearly slipped. That was the moment a black luxury vehicle slowed beside the curb. The black luxury vehicle rolled slowly to the curb. Nancy barely looked up at first. Atlanta traffic stopped and started all day. She assumed this was no different. Her attention was focused on keeping the box from slipping out of her hands. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out. Kenneth. At that point, Kenneth was already known throughout Atlanta for his business success. His schedule was packed. His time was valuable. Yet something about the young woman struggling with those boxes had caught his attention. It wasn't the boxes. It wasn't her clothes. It wasn't even her situation. It was the fact that she was clearly struggling and still refusing to give up. Kenneth walked toward her. "You look like you could use a hand." Nancy immediately took a small step backward. Her eyes narrowed. "Before we continue, I need to ask an important question." Kenneth looked confused. "Okay," Nancy pointed around dramatically. Are there hidden cameras somewhere? Kenneth blinked. What? If this is one of those kindness videos, I need to warn you. I photograph terribly. For a second, Kenneth simply stared. Then he laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite laugh he used during business meetings. Not the forced laugh people expected from him. A genuine laugh. Nancy smiled. Good. At least one of us is having a better day. Kenneth shook his head. You always this funny? Only when my transportation disappears, my phone dies, and gravity declares war on my arms. Kenneth took one of the boxes before she could protest. Where are these going? Nancy explained the outreach program, the donated supplies, the families waiting for help, the volunteers preparing for the event. Kenneth listened carefully. Most people spoke about problems. Nancy spoke about solutions. Most people focused on what they lacked. Nancy focused on who needed help more than she did. The conversation interested him. A few minutes later, the boxes were safely loaded into the vehicle. Kenneth drove her to the outreach location. When they arrived, he noticed something immediately. The program was operating on very little. Volunteers were stretching every dollar. Supplies were limited. Without making a big announcement, Kenneth purchased additional food and supplies for the event. Nancy stared at him. You didn't have to do that. I know. The answer surprised her. There was no speech, no attempt to impress anyone, just a simple act of generosity. For nearly an hour afterward, Kenneth stayed and talked with her. He learned about her classes, her goals, her determination to build a better future. Before leaving, he looked directly at her. Keep going. 2 simple words. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated. But the way he said them made Nancy believe he truly meant them. She watched his vehicle disappear down the street. At the time, she thought she would probably never see Kenneth again. What Nancy didn't realize was that those 2 words would stay with her for years. And one day, they would lead her right back to his front door. 5 years passed. The young woman standing beside the road with outreach boxes no longer existed. Not because Nancy had forgotten those days, because she had grown beyond them. Life did not suddenly become easy after meeting Kenneth. She still had bills. She still faced setbacks. She still had days when quitting seemed easier than continuing. The difference was that she no longer doubted whether her effort mattered. She finished her education 1 class at a time. Some semesters she could afford more courses. Some semesters she could barely afford 1. Yet she kept moving forward. Every completed class felt like proof that her future could be bigger than her circumstances. The same determination that carried outreach boxes through downtown. Atlanta now carried her through long nights of studying. Years later, that hard work began opening doors. Nancy started working with organizations focused on helping people from underserved communities. She understood many of their struggles because she had lived them herself. Instead of simply talking about solutions, she helped create them. She assisted with mentoring programs, career preparation workshops, educational opportunities, community support initiatives. Whenever someone felt discouraged, Nancy often found herself encouraging them. One afternoon, a young woman preparing for a job interview looked nervous and overwhelmed. What if I fail? She asked. Nancy smiled. Then you learn something and try again. What if nobody believes in me? Nancy paused. I wouldn't worry too much about that. The young woman looked confused. Nancy laughed softly. Sometimes one person is enough. The words surprised even her, because she immediately remembered where that lesson came from. Kenneth. 5 years earlier, he had spent less than an hour talking with her. Less than an hour. Yet that conversation stayed with her. Not because he gave her money, not because he bought supplies, but because he treated her goals as if they mattered. Many people had seen her circumstances. Kenneth had seen her potential. That difference changed something inside her. Nancy wasn't rich. She didn't own a mansion. She didn't have private jets or magazine covers. But she was respected, successful, fulfilled. Most importantly, she was happy with the life she was building. And every now and then she found herself wondering what had happened to the man who once stopped his vehicle to help a stranger, carrying boxes. While Nancy was building a life filled with purpose, Kenneth's world had continued moving in a very different direction. From the outside, everything looked perfect. His businesses were growing. His investments were performing well. New achievements seemed to arrive every year. New awards joined the collection displayed throughout his Atlanta mansion. Business magazines wanted interviews. Organizations wanted partnerships. Executives wanted meetings. Success followed Kenneth almost everywhere he went. The problem was that success always seemed to leave with everyone else at the end of the day. Most evenings followed the same pattern: a long workday, a drive home, a quiet house, dinner alone. Another night with more square footage than conversation. One evening, Kenneth walked through the mansion carrying an award he had received earlier that day. The recognition represented years of work, years of sacrifice, years of discipline. He placed it on a shelf beside several others. Then he stepped back and looked at them. For a moment, he laughed to himself. At this rate, these things are going to need their own address. The joke echoed through an empty room. No one laughed with him. That silence stayed longer than the joke. Kenneth wasn't unhappy, but he had begun asking himself questions he never used to ask. Who would he call just to talk? Who truly knew him outside of business? Who would celebrate with him if the awards disappeared tomorrow? The answers were smaller than he expected. Around the same time, Nancy heard something surprising through people connected to community programs and volunteer efforts. Throughout Atlanta, Kenneth still supported many charitable causes. He still helped people. He still showed up when communities needed assistance. But several people made similar observations. He does a lot for others. He's a good man. Works too much, though. Always seems alone. The comments stayed with Nancy. At first she ignored them. Then she found herself thinking about them again and again. Years earlier, Kenneth had noticed a stranger carrying heavy boxes when everyone else kept moving. Now Nancy couldn't stop wondering whether people were overlooking something important about him. The thought followed her for weeks. One evening, she sat quietly reflecting on everything that had happened since the day they met. The more she thought about it, the clearer her decision became. The next afternoon, Nancy placed a small gift inside a gift bag. She got into her car. She drove across Atlanta, past busy streets, past familiar neighborhoods, past countless opportunities to turn around. But she didn't. Eventually, she arrived at Kenneth's mansion. Nancy took a deep breath, walked to the front door, and pressed the doorbell. The doorbell echoed through Kenneth's mansion. For a moment, he stood still. He was not expecting anyone. Most people who needed him called his office first. Business partners sent messages. Charity leaders scheduled meetings. Even old acquaintances usually found a way through assistance before arriving at his home. So when the bell rang again, Kenneth walked toward the door with a slight frown. He opened it. The evening air touched his face. Standing on the porch was a woman holding a small gift bag. Kenneth stared. Something about her face pulled at his memory. The smile, the eyes, the confidence. He knew her, but 5 years had changed her. She was no longer the tired young woman struggling beside a downtown Atlanta sidewalk with outreach boxes in her arms. She stood taller now, calmer, like life had tested her, but had not managed to break her. Kenneth's voice came out slowly. Nancy? Her smile softened. You still remember? Kenneth let out a quiet laugh, almost surprised by himself. You're hard to forget. Nancy looked down for half a second, touched by the answer, then lifted the gift bag slightly. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Kenneth glanced at the bag. No, I just wasn't expecting visitors. I know, she said. I almost turned around twice. Why didn't you? Nancy smiled again. Because this took 5 years. That sentence made Kenneth's expression change. He stepped back from the doorway. Come in. Nancy walked inside, still holding the gift bag carefully with both hands. Kenneth noticed it again. What's in the bag? Something small. Small things don't usually bring people to a billionaire's door after 5 years. Nancy raised one eyebrow. Maybe that's because billionaires keep thinking everything has to be big. Kenneth laughed. There it was again, that same sharp humor he remembered from the sidewalk. Still, his mind searched for a reason. Nancy, are you in trouble? No. Do you need help? No. A job recommendation? No. Kenneth folded his arms, confused. Then I'm lost. Nancy looked directly at him. I didn't come to receive anything from you, Kenneth. He went quiet. She lifted the bag one more time. I came to give something back. Kenneth looked at the gift bag again. The longer he stared at it, the more curious he became. He had spent years negotiating business deals worth millions of dollars. Yet somehow, this small gift bag felt more mysterious than any contract he had ever signed. Nancy sat down across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she carefully reached into the bag. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," she said. Kenneth leaned forward slightly. Nancy removed a small framed photograph. She handed it to him. Kenneth took it carefully. His eyes moved across the image. It was a photograph from the outreach program they had visited 5 years earlier. Boxes of supplies, volunteers helping families, children smiling. Community members gathered together. Kenneth immediately recognized the day. Then he noticed something else. Near the edge of the photograph stood a younger Nancy, and beside her stood Kenneth, not posing, not looking at the camera, simply working, helping, talking. A normal moment captured without either of them noticing. Kenneth looked up. "You kept this?" Nancy nodded. "For 5 years." Kenneth studied the photograph again. Nancy smiled. "Most people think that day changed because of the supplies you purchased." Kenneth listened quietly. "But that's not what stayed with me." She pointed gently toward the photograph. "You stopped." Kenneth frowned slightly. "What do you mean? Everybody else kept moving." The room became quiet. Nancy continued. "You listened when you didn't have to. You treated my goals like they mattered. You looked at somebody carrying boxes and saw more than a problem." Kenneth lowered his eyes to the photograph. For years he had helped countless people. Most encounters blended together. This one clearly hadn't. Nancy continued. "I never forgot what you told me." Kenneth smiled. "Keep going." Nancy laughed. "See? You remember?" "I do. Those 2 words helped me through more situations than you probably realize." Kenneth sat silently for a moment. Something about hearing that affected him more than he expected. Not because of the photograph, not because of the gift, because someone had returned after 5 years simply to tell him that his kindness mattered. No business agenda, no request, no hidden motive, just gratitude. The conversation continued. One topic led to another. Minutes became an hour, then another. For the first time in a very long time, Kenneth wasn't discussing business, investments, or schedules. He was simply talking, laughing, listening, being himself. And for the first time in years, Kenneth felt something he hadn't realized he missed. He felt genuinely seen. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever thanked someone who changed your life? If you had the chance today, who would it be? Let us know in the comments, because your answer might encourage someone else to reach out before it's too late. After that evening, Kenneth expected life to return to normal. It did not. Nancy's visit had shifted something in him. For days, he found himself looking at the framed photograph she had given him. Not because he enjoyed seeing himself in it, but because the image reminded him of a version of life that felt real. No stage, no cameras, no business language, just people helping people. A week later, Nancy called him. "I'm going to a community volunteer event this Saturday," she said. "You should come." Kenneth paused. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means wear comfortable shoes and don't arrive acting expensive." Kenneth looked down at his polished office shoes. "I feel judged already. You'll survive." That Saturday, Kenneth arrived at a local community space in Atlanta, dressed simply but still looking like a man who had asked someone what casual meant and received unclear instructions. Nancy saw him and laughed. "You tried. I need you to know I rejected 3 outfits before this." "Good. Growth is painful." The event was full of movement. People set up food tables, arranged, donated items, carried supplies, and greeted one another with warmth. Kenneth stood near Nancy at first, unsure where to place himself. Nancy handed him a stack of folding chairs. "Start with these." Kenneth looked at the chair like it had personally offended him. "This looks simple. That's how they trick you." He opened one chair successfully. Confidence entered his face. The second chair fought back. Somehow, one leg folded the wrong way, the seat snapped forward, and... Kenneth nearly trapped his own hand. Nancy burst out laughing. Kenneth stepped back quickly. "If this ends up online, I'm suing everybody." The people nearby laughed too, not at him cruelly. With him. Kenneth shook his head, smiling. "I manage companies, but this chair just humbled me in public." Nancy wiped tears from the corner of her eye. "That chair gave you character. I thought I already had enough character." Nancy looked at him surprised. He smiled. I remembered that from you for the rest of the afternoon. Kenneth helped carry supplies, serve plates, and speak with people without mentioning money or status. At first he was awkward. By the end he was laughing freely. For the first time in years, Kenneth was not managing life. He was living it. The volunteer event was supposed to be a one-time invitation. At least that was what Kenneth told himself. A week later he showed up again. Then again. And after that, it simply became normal. Sometimes Nancy invited him. Sometimes Kenneth asked what was happening that weekend. The answer was usually simple. A community project, a church gathering, a food distribution effort, a neighborhood cookout. For the first time in years, Kenneth began placing those events on his calendar before some business meetings. Something about them felt different. Nobody cared about his net worth. Nobody asked about investments. Nobody treated him like a walking opportunity. People simply treated him like Kenneth, and surprisingly, he liked that version of himself. One Saturday afternoon, Kenneth arrived early to help set up tables before a community meal. Nancy was already working. She moved quickly between tasks, helping wherever she was needed. Kenneth watched her for a moment, not because she was asking for attention, because she never did. Nancy worked the same way she had carried those outreach boxes 5 years earlier. Quiet determination, no complaints, no performance, just effort. "You're staring," Nancy said without looking up. Kenneth immediately looked away. "I was observing. You were staring?" "Business leaders observe," Nancy laughed. "Sure they do." Kenneth found himself smiling. Conversations with Nancy always felt easy. That was becoming dangerous. Not dangerous in a bad way. Dangerous because he was getting used to them. Meanwhile, Nancy noticed changes too. The man standing beside her was very different from the public version. People talked about he was generous without announcing it, funny without trying too hard, patient with people, quick to help, slow to take credit. The more time she spent around Kenneth, the more she understood why. One afternoon with him had stayed in her memory for years. His kindness had never been an act. It was simply who he was. Weeks became months. The friendship continued growing. So did the trust between them. They shared stories, dreams, failures, lessons learned. Each conversation revealed something new. Neither rushed anything. Neither questioned where the connection was leading. Yet both noticed small changes. Kenneth looked forward to seeing Nancy. Nancy found herself smiling whenever his name appeared on her phone. Neither mentioned it. Neither needed to. Some feelings arrive quietly, not with grand speeches, not with dramatic moments, just a growing certainty that life feels better when a particular person is around. Neither Nancy nor Kenneth was ready to admit that yet. But both were beginning to feel it. Months passed, and Kenneth could no longer pretend Nancy's return had been a small event in his life. She had not just visited his home, she had stepped into the quiet spaces he had stopped talking about. By then, Kenneth had become part of Nancy's community work in a way nobody expected. He still had meetings, responsibilities, and businesses to manage, but he no longer allowed success to swallow his whole life. One evening after a volunteer event in Atlanta, Kenneth and Nancy stayed behind to help clean up. Most people had already left. Nancy was stacking leftover supplies while Kenneth folded chairs with far more confidence than the first time. Nancy noticed and smiled. "Look at you. The chair didn't win today." Kenneth lifted one chair proudly. "I've been training. That is not something you should say out loud." He laughed, but the laughter softened quickly. For a moment, he looked at Nancy with honest curiosity. "Nancy?" "Yes?" He set the chair aside. "Why did you really come back?" Nancy stopped moving. Kenneth continued carefully. "I know what you said that night. I know you came to thank me. But you drove across Atlanta after 5 years. You brought that photograph. You stayed in my life. I need to understand why." Nancy took a slow breath. She did not look offended, only thoughtful. "I didn't come for money, Kenneth. I know. I didn't come for opportunity. I know that too. I didn't come because I expected romance." Kenneth went quiet. Nancy looked at him gently. "And I didn't come for favors. Then why?" She placed the supplies down. "Because somebody needed to tell you the truth." Kenneth held her gaze. Nancy's voice stayed calm, but every word carried weight. "That day 5 years ago, you probably thought you helped a tired woman with some boxes." Kenneth said nothing. "But you did more than that. You made me feel seen at a time when I was starting to wonder if my effort mattered." His face changed. Nancy continued. You gave me encouragement when I was exhausted. You treated my dreams with respect. You reminded me that my future was still possible." Kenneth looked down. For once he had no polished answer. Nancy smiled softly. "Your kindness mattered, Kenneth. It changed my future." Kenneth swallowed hard. In all his years of success, few words had ever reached him that deeply. Kenneth remained quiet for several moments after Nancy finished speaking. The volunteer center had grown still around them. Only a few stacked tables and packed boxes remained. For once, Kenneth wasn't thinking about business. He wasn't thinking about schedules. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He was thinking about the woman standing in front of him, the woman who had driven across Atlanta simply to tell him that his kindness mattered. Nancy gave him time to process everything. She knew some truths deserved silence before responses. Finally, Kenneth smiled. "You know what's funny?" Nancy crossed her arms lightly. "That depends entirely on what you're about to say." Kenneth laughed. "Fair answer." Nancy smiled. Kenneth looked at her. "When you showed up at my door, I thought you needed something." "I remember. I spent days trying to figure out what it was." Nancy shook her head. "You weren't very subtle." "I know." They both laughed. Then Kenneth became serious again. "The truth is, Nancy, you're the one who gave something to me." Nancy's smile faded into curiosity. "What did I give you?" Kenneth didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room. The supplies, the volunteer work, the purpose, the people they had spent months helping together. Then he looked back at her. "You brought life back into my world." Nancy's eyes widened slightly. Kenneth continued, "Before you came back, I was accomplishing things. I was succeeding. I was checking goals off a list." He smiled gently, "But I wasn't enjoying much of it." Nancy listened carefully. "You reminded me that people matter more than achievements. You reminded me what genuine connection feels like." The room fell quiet again. This time neither seemed uncomfortable. Nancy looked down briefly before meeting his eyes. "Can I tell you something?" "Always," she smiled. "I never forgot you." "Because he believed them." Nancy laughed softly. "Honestly, I expected you to forget me. Not a chance. You met thousands of people. And somehow you're the one standing here." Their eyes met. No grand speech followed, no dramatic moment. Just two people finally acknowledging what had been growing between them for months, a connection built on respect, trust, shared values, and genuine affection. Neither rushed to define everything, but both knew they wanted the same thing: to keep building a future together, helping people, serving their community, and seeing where this new chapter of life would lead. The following year became one of the happiest periods in both Kenneth's and Nancy's lives, not because everything was perfect, not because challenges disappeared, but because they were no longer walking through life alone. Together, they continued supporting outreach programs across Atlanta. They volunteered, organized community projects, helped create opportunities for people who needed encouragement, resources, and hope. The work never became about recognition. It remained about impact. One Saturday afternoon, they attended a large community gathering, similar to the one that had connected their lives years earlier. Families filled the space. Volunteers moved between tables. Children laughed while playing nearby. Nancy stood beside Kenneth, watching everything unfold. "It's amazing," she said. "What is?" Nancy smiled. "How one small decision can change so much." Kenneth looked at her. "You mean when you came back?" Nancy shook her head. "No." She pointed toward the crowd. "I mean when you stopped your vehicle 5 years ago." Kenneth laughed softly. "You still give me too much credit." "Not possible." They stood together, watching people enjoy the event they had helped support. For a moment, Kenneth thought about how differently life might have turned out if he had simply driven past that day. One conversation, one act of kindness, one decision to stop and help. That was all it took. Nancy slipped her hand into his. Kenneth smiled, and this time neither let go. Their story became proof that kindness never truly disappears. Sometimes it returns years later when you least expect it. Sometimes it arrives carrying gratitude. Sometimes it arrives carrying love. And sometimes it changes two lives at the same time. The lesson is simple. Never underestimate a single act of kindness. The encouragement you give today may become the reason someone succeeds tomorrow. And the strongest relationships are not built on wealth, status, or possessions. They are built on character, respect, trust, and genuine care for one another. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Subscribe to Love, Money, and Secret for more unforgettable stories and life lessons. Thank you for spending this time with us. And remember, kindness has a way of finding its way back home.